while Poirot went through the suitcase. "Well?" Japp asked Poirot. "Nothing," the detective replied, closing the suitcase. "Nothing." "I am disappointed." "You think you're so very clever, do you not?" snobbed Corelli. "But I could tell you," Poirot interrupted him, speaking quietly and significantly. "You could, perhaps. But it would be very unwise." Startled, Corelli exclaimed, "What do you mean?" "Monsieur Poirot is quite right," Japp declared. "You'd better keep your mouth shut." Moving to the hall door, he opened it and called, "Johnson." The young constable put his head around the door. "Get the whole family together for me, will you?" Japp asked him. "I want them all here." "Yes, sir," said Johnson as he left the room. "I protest, Corelli gasped. Suddenly he grabbed his suitcase and made a dash towards the French windows. Japp rushed after him, grabbed him, and threw him onto the settee, taking the suitcase from him as he did so. "No one's hurt you yet, so don't squeal," Japp barked at the now thoroughly cowed Italian. Poirot strolled towards the French windows. "Please don't go away now, Monsieur Poirot," Japp called after him, putting Corelli's suitcase down by the coffee table. "This should be interesting." No, my dear chap, I am not leaving," Poirot assured him. "I shall be right here. This family gathering, as you say, will be most interesting indeed." A few minutes later, when the Amory family began to assemble in the library, Corelli was still seated on the settee, looking rather sullen, while Poirot continued to hover by the French windows. Barbara Amory, with Hastings in tow, returned from the garden through the French windows, and Barbara moved to share the settee with Corelli, while Hastings went to stand by Poirot's side. Poirot whispered to his colleague, "It would be helpful, Hastings, if you would make a note, and mental note, you understand, of where they all choose to sit." "Helpful? How?" asked Hastings. "Psychologically, my friend," was Poirot's only reply. When Lucia entered the room, Hastings watched her as she sat in the chair to the right of the table. Richard arrived with his aunt, Miss Amory, who sat on the stool as Richard moved behind the table to keep a protective eye on his wife. Edward Raynal was the last to arrive, taking up a position behind the armchair. He was followed into the room by the Constable Johnson, who shut the door and stood close to it. Richard Amory introduced Inspector Japp to those two members of the family whom Japp had not already met. "My aunt, Miss Amory," he announced, "and my cousin, Miss Barbara Amory." Acknowledging the introduction, Barbara asked, "What's all the excitement, Inspector?" Japp avoided her question. "Now, I think we're all here, are we not?" he remarked, moving to the fireplace. Miss Amory looked bewildered and a little apprehensive. "I don't quite understand," she said to Richard. "What is this gentleman doing here?" "I think perhaps I ought to tell you something," Richard answered her. "You see, Aunt Caroline, and all of you," he added, glancing around the room, "Dr. Graham has discovered that my father was poisoned." "What?" exclaimed Raina sharply. Miss Amory gave a cry of horror. "He was poisoned with hyoscine," Richard continued. Raina gave a snort. "With hyoscine? Why, I saw—" He stopped dead, looking at Lucia. Taking a step towards him, Inspector Japp asked, "What did you say, Mr. Raina?" The secretary looked embarrassed. "Nothing, at least," he began uncertainly. His voice trailed off into silence. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Raina," Japp insisted, "but I've got to have the truth." "Come now. Everyone realizes you're keeping something back." "No, it's nothing, really," said the secretary. I mean, there's obviously some quite reasonable explanation. Explanation for what, Mr. Rayner? Asked Jap. Rayner still hesitated. Well, Jap prompted him. Well, it was only that... Rayner paused again and then made up his mind to continue. It was only that I saw Mrs. Amory emptying out some of those little tablets into her hand. When was this? Jap asked him. Oh, last night. I was coming out of Sir Claud's study, and the others were busy with the gramophone. Yeah, they were all clustered around it. I noticed her pick up a tube of tablets. I thought it was the hyacinth, and pour most of them out into the palm of my hand. And then the Sir Claud called me back into the study for something. Oh, why didn't you mention this before? Asked Jap. Lucia began to speak, but the inspector silenced her. 1 minute, please, Mrs. Amory, insisted. I'd like to hear from Mr. Rayner first. Yeah, well, I never thought of it again, Rayner told him. It was only when Mr. Amory said just now that Sir Claud had been poisoned with the hyacinth that it came back to me. Of course, I realize it's perfectly all right. It was just the coincidence that startled me. The tablets might not have been hyacinth at all. It could have been one of the other tubes that she was handling. Jap now turned to Lucia. Well, ma'am, he asked. What have you got to say about it? Lucia seemed quite composed as she answered, to make me sleep. Addressing Rayner again, Jap asked, You say she pretty well emptied the tube. It seems so to me, said Rayner. Jap turned again to Lucia. Well, you wouldn't have needed so many tablets to make you sleep. 1 or 2 would have been sufficient. What did you do with the rest? Lucia thought for a moment before replying. I can't remember. She was about to continue when Corelli rose to his feet and burst out venomously. You'll see, Inspector. They are to see your murderess. Barbara rose quickly from the settee and moved away from Corelli, while Hastings hurried to her side. The Italian continued, You shall have the truth, Inspector. I came down here especially to see that woman. She had sent for me. She said she would get Sir Claud's formula, and she offered to sell it to me. I'll admit that I've dealt with such things in the past. That's not much of an admission, Jap advised him, moving between Corelli and Lucia. We know as much already. He turned to Lucia. All of you to say to all this, madam. Lucia rose, her face drained of color, and Richard went to her. I'm not going to allow, he began when Jap stopped him. If you please, sir. Corelli spoke again. Just to look at that woman. None of you know who she is, but I do. She's the daughter of Selma Goods, the daughter of one of the most infamous women the world has ever known. It's not true, Richard, the chair cried. It's not true. Don't listen to him, or I'll break every bone in your body, Richard Amory growled at Corelli. Jap took a pace towards Richard. Keep calm, sir, do keep calm, please, he admonished. We've got to get to the bottom of this. Jap turned to Lucia. Now then, Mrs. Amory. There was a pause, and Lucia tried to speak. She began. She looked at her husband, and then at Poirot, holding out her hand helplessly to the detective. Have courage, madame, Poirot advised her. Trusting me? Tell them the truth. We have come to the point where lies will serve no longer. The truth will have to come out. Lucia looked pleadingly at Poirot. He merely repeated, Have courage, madame. See, be brave and speak. He returned to his position by the French windows. After a long pause, Lucia began to speak, her voice low and stifled. It is true that I am Selma Goods' daughter. It is not true that I asked that man to come here, or that I offered to sell him Sir Claud's formula. He came here to blackmail me. Blackmail, gasped Richard, moving to her. Lucia turned to Richard. There was some urgency in her tone as she spoke. He threatened to tell you about my mother, unless I got the formula for him. And I didn't do it. I think he must have stolen it. He had the chance. He was alone in there, in the study, and I see now that he wanted me to take the heist and then kill myself, so that everyone would think that it was I who had stolen the formula. He almost hypnotized me. She broke down and sobbed on Richard's shoulder. With a cry of, "Lucia, my darling," Richard embraced her. Then, passing his wife over to Miss Amory, who had risen, and who now embraced the distressed young woman consolingly, Richard addressed Jap. "Inspector, I want to speak to you alone." Jap looked at Richard Amory for a moment and then gave a brief nod to Johnson. "Are you all?" he agreed, as the constable opened the door for Miss Amory and a chair. Barbara and Hastings took the opportunity of returning to the garden through the French windows, while Edward Rayner, as he left, murmured to Richard, "I'm sorry, Mr. Amory, very sorry." As Corelli picked up his suitcase and followed Rayner out, Jap instructed his constable, "Keep your eye on Mrs. Amory, and also on Dr. Corelli." Corelli turned at the door, and Jap continued to the constable, "Must be no funny business for anyone, you understand?" "I understand, sir," replied Johnson as he followed Corelli out of the room. "I'm sorry, Mr. Amory," said Jap to Richard Amory, "but after what Mr. Rayner has told us, I'm bound to take every precaution, and I want Mr. Poirot to remain here as a witness to whatever you tell me." Richard approached Jap with the air of a man who has come to a momentous decision. Taking a deep breath, he spoke with determination. "Inspector, what is it?" asked Jap. Very deliberately and slowly, Richard replied, "I think it's time I confessed. I killed my father." Jap smiled. "Oh, I'm afraid that won't work, sir." Richard looked astonished. "What do you mean?" "No, sir," Jap continued. "Or to put it differently, that cat won't jump. You're very set on your good lady, I realize, newly married and all that. But to speak plainly to you, it's no manner of use putting your neck in a halter for the sake of a bad woman. Though she's a good looker and no mistake, I'll admit. Inspector Jap, Sven Richard angrily, "There's no point in getting upset with me, sir," Jap continued imperturbably. "I've told you the plain truth without beating about the bush, and I've no doubt that Mr. Poirot here will tell you the same. I'm sorry, sir, but duty is duty, and murder is murder. That's all there is to it." Jap nodded decisively and left the room. Turning to Poirot, who had been observing the scene from the settee, Richard asked coldly, "Well, are you here to tell me the same, Monsieur Poirot?" Rising, Poirot took a cigarette case from his pocket and extracted a cigarette. Instead of answering Richard's question, he posed one of his own. "Monsieur Amory, when did you first suspect your wife?" he asked. "I never—" Richard began, but Poirot interrupted, picking up a box of matches from the table as he spoke. "Please, I beg of you, Monsieur Amory, nothing but the truth. You did suspect her, eh, Knight? You suspected her before I arrived. That is why you were so anxious to get me away from this house. I do not deny it. It is impossible to deceive Hercule Poirot." He lit his cigarette, replaced the box of matches on the table, and smiled up at the much taller man who towered over him. They made a ridiculous contrast. "You're mistaken," Richard told Poirot stiffly, "utterly mistaken. How could I suspect Lucia? And yet, of course, there is an equally good case to be made against you," Poirot continued reflectively as he resumed his seat. "You handled the drinks. You handled the coffee. You were short of money and desperate to acquire some. Oh yes, anyone might be excused for suspecting you." "Inspector Jap doesn't seem to agree with you," Richard observed. "Ah, Jap. He has the common sense, Poirot smiled. He is not a woman in love. Woman in love? Richard sounded puzzled. Let me give you a lesson in psychology, monsieur, Poirot offered. When I first arrived, your wife came up to me and begged me to stay here and discover the murderer. Would a deceit woman have done that? You mean? Richard began quickly. I mean, Poirot interrupted him, that before the sun sets tonight, you will be asking her pardon upon your knees. What are you saying? I am saying too much, perhaps, Poirot admitted, rising. Now, monsieur, place yourself in my hands. In the hands of Hercule Poirot. You can save her, Richard asked with desperation in his voice. Poirot regarded him solemnly. I have pledged you my word. Although when I did so, I did not realize how difficult it was going to be. You see, the time is very short, and something must be done quickly. You must promise me that you will do it exactly as I tell you, without asking questions or making difficulties. Do you promise me that? Very well, replied Richard rather unwillingly. That is good. And now listen to me. What I suggest is neither difficult nor impossible. It is, in fact, the common sense. This house will shortly be given over to the police. They will swarm all over it. They will make their investigations everywhere. For yourself and your family it could be very unpleasant. I suggest that you leave. I'll give the house over to the police, Richard asked incredulously. That is my suggestion, Poirot repeated. Of course you will have to remain in the neighborhood, but they say the local hotel is very comfortable. Engage a room there. Then you will be close at hand when the police wish to question you all. But when do you suggest that this should take place? Poirot beamed at him. My idea was immediately. Well, surely it will all very odd. Not at all, not at all, the little detective assured Richard, smiling again. It will appear to be a move of the utmost, how do you say, the utmost sensitivity to you. You cannot bear to remain another hour. I assure you it will sound very well. But how about the inspector? I myself will fix it up with Inspector Japp. I can't see what good this is going to achieve, Richard persisted. Now of course you did not see. Poirot sounded more than a trifle smug. He shrugged his shoulders. It is not necessary that you should see. But I see. I, Hercule Poirot. That is enough. He took Richard by the shoulders. Go, and make the arrangements. Or if you cannot give your mind to it, let Reynard make them for you. Go, go. He almost pushed Richard to the door. With a final anxious look back at Poirot, Richard left the room. Ah, this English, how obstinate, muttered Poirot. He moved to the French windows and called, Mademoiselle Barbara. In answer to Poirot's call, Barbara Amory appeared outside the French windows. What is it? Has something else happened? She asked. Poirot gave her his most winning smile. Ah, mademoiselle, he said, I wonder if you might be able to spare my colleague Hastings for just a little minute or two, perhaps. Barbara's reply was accompanied by a skittish glance. So, you want to take my little pet away from me, do you? Just for a very short time, mademoiselle, I promise you. Then you shall, Monsieur Poirot. Turning back into the garden, Barbara called, My pet, you're wanted. I thank you. Poirot smiled again with a polite bow. Barbara returned to the garden, and a few moments later Hastings entered the library through the French windows, looking somewhat ashamed. And what have you to say for yourself? Poirot asked in a tone of mock annoyance. Hastings attempted an apologetic smile. It is all very well to put on the grain of the sheep, Poirot admonished him. I leave you here en garde, and the next thing I know you are promenading yourself with that very charming young lady in the garden. You are generally the most reliable of men, mon cher. But as soon as a pretty young woman appears upon the scene, your judgment flies out of the window citadel. Hastings' sheepish grin faded, to be replaced by a blush of embarrassment. I said, I'm awfully sorry, Poirot, he exclaimed. I just stepped outside for a second and then I saw you through the window coming into the room, so I thought it didn't matter. You mean you thought it better not to return to face me, declared Poirot. Well, my dear Hastings, you may have done the most irreparable damage. I found Carretti in here. The good Lord alone knows what he was doing, or what evidence he was tampering with. Oh, I say, Poirot, I really am sorry. Hastings apologized again. I'm most awfully sorry. If you have not done the damage irreparable, it is more by good luck than for any other reason. But now, mon ami, the moment has come when we must employ our little grey selves. Pretending to smack Hastings on the cheek, Poirot in fact gave his colleague an affectionate pat. Ah, good. Let's get to work, Hastings exclaimed. No, it is not good, my friend, Poirot told him. It is bad. It is obscure. His face wore a troubled look as he continued. It is dark as it was last night. He thought for a moment and then added, but yes, I think there is perhaps an idea, the germ of an idea. Yes, we will start there. Looking completely mystified, Hastings asked, what on earth are you talking about? The tone of Poirot's voice changed. He spoke gravely and thoughtfully. Why did Sir Claud die, Hastings? Answer me that. Why did Sir Claud die? Hastings stared at him. But we know that, he exclaimed. Do we? Asked Poirot. Are you so very sure? Well, yes. Hastings responded, though somewhat uncertainly. He died, he died because he was poisoned. Poirot made an impatient gesture. Yes, but why was he poisoned? Hastings thought carefully before replying. Then, surely it must have been because the thief suspected it again. Poirot slowly shook his head as Hastings continued. Because the thief suspected that he'd been discovered. He broke off again as he observed Poirot continuing to shake his head. Suppose, Hastings, Poirot murmured, just suppose that the thief did not suspect. Why, I don't quite see, Hastings confessed. Poirot moved away, then turned back with his arm raised in a gesture that seemed intended to hold his friend's attention. He paused and cleared his throat. Let me recount to you, Hastings, he declared, the sequence of events as they might have gone, or rather as I think they were meant to go. Hastings sat in the chair by the table as Poirot continued. Sir Claud dies in his chair one night. Poirot moved to the armchair, sat, and paused for a moment before repeating thoughtfully. Yes, Sir Claud dies in his chair. There are no suspicious circumstances attending that death. In all probability it will be put on to heart failure. It will be some days before his private papers are examined. His will is the only document that will be searched for. After the funeral, in due course, it will be discovered that his notes on the new explosive are incomplete. It may never be known that the exact formula existed. You see what that gives to our thief, Hastings? Yes. What? Asked Poirot. Hastings looked puzzled. What? He repeated. Security. That is what he tips the thief. He can dispose of his booty quite safely, whenever he wishes to. There is no pressure upon him. Even if the existence of the formula is known, he will have had plenty of time to cover his tracks. Well, it's your idea, oh yes, I suppose so. Hastings commented in a dubious tone, but naturally it is an idea. I might not Hercule Poirot. But see now where this idea leads us. It tells us that the murder of Sir Claud was not a chance maneuver executed on the spur of the moment. It was a plan beforehand. Beforehand. You see now where we are. No, Hastings admitted with an engaging candor. You know very well I never see these things. I know that we're in the library of Sir Claud's house, and that's all. Yes, my friend, you are right, Poirot told him. We are in the library of Sir Claud Amory's house. It is not morning, but evening. The lights have just gone out. The thief's plans have gone awry. Poirot sat very upright and wagged his forefinger emphatically to emphasize his points. Sir Claud, who, in the normal course of things, would not have gone to that safe until the following day, has discovered his loss by a mere chance. And as the old gentleman himself said, the thief is caught like a rat in a trap. Yes, but the thief, who is also the murderer, knows something too that Sir Claud does not. The thief knows that in a very few minutes Sir Claud will be silenced forever. He is to be solved, and one only, to hide the paper safely during those few moments of darkness. Shut your eyes, Hastings, as I shut mine. The lights have gone out. We can see nothing, but we can hear. Repeat to me, Hastings, as accurately as you can, the words of Miss Amory when she described the scene to us. Hastings shut his eyes. Then he began to speak, slowly, with an effort of memory and several pauses. Gasps, he uttered. Potter nodded. A lot of little gasps, Hastings went on, and Potter nodded again. Hastings concentrated for a time and then continued. The noise of a chair falling, a metallic clink, that must have been the key, I imagine. Quite right, said Poirot. The key. Continue. A scream. No, that was Routier screaming. She called out to Sir Claud. Then the knocking came at the door. Wait a minute. Right at the beginning, the noise of tearing silk. Hastings opened his eyes. Yes. Tearing silk. Poirot explained. He rose, moved to the desk, and then crossed to the fireplace. It is all there, Hastings, in those few moments of darkness. All there. And yet our ears turns nothing. He stopped at the mantelpiece and mechanically straightened the vase of spills. Oh, do stop straightening those damn things, Poirot, Hastings complained. You're always at it. His attention rested. Poirot removed his hand from the vase. What is that you say? He asked. Yes, it is true. He stared at the vase of spills. I remember straightening them but a little hour ago. And now, it is necessary that I straighten them again. He spoke excitedly. Why, Hastings? Why is that? Well, because they're crooked, I suppose, Hastings replied in a bored tone. It's just your little manual for neatness. Tearing silk, explained Poirot. No, Hastings. This sound is the same. He stared up the paper spills and snatched up the bars that contained them. Tearing paper. It continued as he moved away from the mantelpiece. His excitement communicated itself to his friend. "What is it?" Hastings asked, springing up and moving to in. Potter stood tumbling out the spills onto the settee and examining them. Every now and then he handed one to Hastings, muttering, "Here he swam. Another. And yet another." Hastings unfolded the spills and scrutinized them. C19 N23 began to read aloud from one of them. Yes, exclaimed Poirot. "It is the formula." "I say, that's wonderful. Quick, fold them up again," Poirot ordered, and Hastings began to do so. "Oh, you are so slow," Poirot admonished him. Quick. Snatching the spills from Hastings, he put them back into the vase and hastened to return it to the mantelpiece. Looking dumbfounded, Hastings joined him there. Poirot beamed. "It ain't traced you what I do there, yes. Tell me, Hastings, what is it that I have here in this vase?" "Why, spills, of course," Hastings replied in a tone of tremendous irony. "Na, mon ami. It is cheese." "Cheese." "Precisely, my friend. Cheese." "I say, Poirot," Hastings inquired sarcastically, "you're all right, aren't you? I mean, you haven't got a headache or anything?" Poirot's reply ignored his friend's frivolous question. "For what do you use cheese, Hastings?" "I will tell you, mon ami. You use it to bait a mousetrap. We wait now for one thing only. The mouse. And the mouse will come, my friend." Poirot assured Hastings. "Rest assured of that. I have sent him a message. He will not fail to respond." Before Hastings had time to react to Poirot's cryptic announcement, the door opened, and Edward Rayner entered the room. "Oh, you're here, Monsieur Poirot," the secretary observed. "And Captain Hastings also. Inspector Japp would like to speak to you both upstairs." "We will come at once," Poirot replied. Followed by Hastings, he walked to the door as Rayner entered the library and crossed to the fireplace. At the door, Poirot suddenly wheeled round to look at the secretary. "By the way, Mr. Rayner," the detective asked as he moved back to the center of the room, "do you by any chance know whether Dr. Cavarelli was here in the library at all this morning?" "Yes, he was," Rayner told the detective. "I found him here." "Ah." Poirot seemed pleased at this. "And what was he doing?" "Why, he was telephoning, I believe." "Was he telephoning when you came in?" "No, he was just coming back into the room. He'd been in Sir Claud's study." Poirot considered this for a moment and then asked Rayner, "Where exactly were you then? Can you remember?" Still standing by the fireplace, Rayner replied, "Oh, somewhere about here, I think." "Did you hear any of Dr. Garrett's conversation on the phone?" "No," said the secretary. "He made it perfectly clear that he wanted to be alone, so I cleared out." "I see." Poirot hesitated and then took a notebook and pencil from his pocket. Writing a few words on a page, he tore it out. "Hastings," he called. Hastings, who had been hovering by the door, came to him, and Poirot gave his friend the folded page. "Oh, would you be so kind as to take that up to Inspector Japp?" Rayner watched Hastings leave the room on his errand and then asked, "What was that all about?" Putting the notebook and pencil back in his pocket, Poirot replied, "I told Japp that I would be with him in a few minutes, and that I might be able to tell him the name of the murderer." "Really? You know who it is?" asked Rayner in a state of some excitement. There was a momentary pause. Hercule Poirot seemed to hold the secretary under the spell of his personality. Rayner watched the detective, fascinated, as he slowly began to speak. "Yes, I think I know who the murderer is." At last, Poirot announced, I am reminded of another case not so long ago. Never shall I forget the killing of Lord Edgware. I was nearly defeated, yes, I, Hercule Poirot, by the extremely simple cunning of a vacant brain. You see, Monsieur Renaud, the very simple minded have often the genius to commit an uncomplicated crime and then leave it alone. Let us hope that the murderer of Sir Claud, on the other hand, is intelligent and superior and thoroughly pleased with himself and unable to resist, painting the lily. Poirot's eyes lit up in vivid animation. Now, not sure that I understand you, said Raina. You mean to say that it's not Mrs. Amory? No, it is not Mrs. Amory, Poirot told him. That is why I wrote my little note. That poor lady has suffered enough. She must be spared any further questioning. Raina looked thoughtful and then exclaimed, Then I'll bet it's Corelli, yes? Poirot wagged a finger at him playfully. Monsieur Renaud, you must permit me to keep my little secret until the last moment. Taking out a handkerchief, he mopped his brow. Oh, mon Dieu, how hurt it is today, he complained. Would you like a drink? Asked Raina. I'm forgetting my manners. I should have offered you one earlier. Poirot beamed. You are very kind. I will have a whiskey, please, if I may. Certainly. Just a moment. Raina left the room while Poirot wandered across to the French windows and looked out into the garden for a moment. Then, moving to the settee, he shook the cushions before drifting across to the mantelpiece to examine the ornaments. In a few moments, Raina returned with 2 whiskeys and sodas on her tray. He watched as Poirot lifted a hand to an ornament on the mantelpiece. This is a valuable antique, I fancy, Poirot remarked, picking up a jug. Is it? Was Raina's uninterested comment. I don't know much about that kind of thing. Come have a drink, he suggested as he set his tray down on the coffee table. Thank you, murmured Poirot, joining him there. Well, here's luck, said Raina, taking a glass and drinking. With a bow, Poirot raised the other glass to his lips. To you, my friend. And now let me tell you of my suspicions. I first realized that. He broke off suddenly, jerking his head over his shoulder as though some sound had caught his ear. Looking close up, indicating that he thought someone might be eavesdropping. Raina nodded in comprehension. The 2 men crept stealthily up to the door, and Poirot gestured at the secretary to remain in the room. Poirot opened the door sharply and bounced outside, but returned immediately, looking extremely crestfallen. Ah, surprising, he admitted to Raina. I could have sworn I had something. However, I made a mistake. It does not happen very often. À votre santé, my friend. He drained the contents of his glass. Ah! Exclaimed Raina as he also drank. I beg your pardon, asked Poirot. Nothing? A load off my mind, that's all. Poirot moved to the table and put his glass down. Do you know, Monsieur Renaud, he confided, to be absolutely honest with you, I have never become quite used to your English national drink, the whiskey. The taste, it faces me not. It is bitter. He moved to the armchair and sat. Really? I'm so sorry. Mine didn't taste at all bitter. Raina put his glass down on the coffee table and continued. I think you were about to tell me something just now, were you not? Poirot looked surprised. Was I? What can it have been? Can I have forgotten already? I think that perhaps I wanted to explain to you how I proceed in an investigation. Voyons. One fact leads to another, so we continue. Does the next one fit in with that? Very good. We can proceed. This next little fact. No. That is curious. There is something missing, a link in the chain that is not there. We examine, we search, and that little curious fact, that perhaps point to a little detail that will not tally, we put it here. Poirot made an extravagant gesture to his head with his hand. It is significant. It is tremendous. Yes, I see, Raina murmured dubiously. Poirot shook his forefinger so fiercely in Raina's face that the secretary almost quailed before it. Ah, beware. Pereira to the detective who says, it is so small it does not matter. It will not agree, I will forget it. That way lies confusion. Everything matters. Poirot suddenly stopped and tapped his head. Ah! Now I remember what I wanted to talk to you about. It was one of those small, unimportant little facts. I wanted to talk to you, Monsieur Raina, about dust. Raina smiled politely. Dust? Precisely, dust. Poirot repeated. My friend Hastings here reminded me just now that I am a detective and not a housemaid. He thought himself very clever to make such a remark, but I am not so sure. The housemaid and the detective, after all, has something in common. The housemaid, what does she do? She explores all the dark corners with her broom. She brings into the light of day all the hidden things that have rolled conveniently out of sight. Does not the detective do much the same? Raina looked bored, but murmured, That is very interesting, Monsieur Poirot. He moved to the chair by the table and sat, before asking, But is that all you wanted me to say? No, not quite, replied Poirot. He leaned forward. You did not throw dust in my eyes, Monsieur Raina, because there was no dust. Do you understand? The secretary stared at him intently. No, I'm afraid I don't. There was no dust on that box of drugs. Mademoiselle Barbara commented on the fact, but there should have been dust. That shelf on which it stands, and Poirot gestured towards it as he spoke, is thick with dust. It was then that I knew. Knew what? I knew, Poirot continued, that someone had taken that box down recently. That the person who poisoned Sir Claud Amory would not need to go near the box last night, since he had on some earlier occasion helped himself to all the poison he needed, choosing a time when he knew he would not be disturbed. You did not go near the box of drugs last night, because you had already taken from it the hyacinth you needed, but you did handle the coffee, Monsieur Raina. Raina smiled patiently. Damn me! To accuse me of murdering Sir Claud. Do you deny it? Asked Poirot. Raina paused before replying. When he spoke again, a harsher tone had entered his voice. Oh no, he declared. I don't deny it. Why should I? I'm really rather proud of the whole thing. It ought to have gone off without a hitch. Was sheer bad luck that made Sir Claud open the safe again last night. He's never done such a thing before. Poirot sounded rather drowsy as he asked, Why are you telling me all this? Oh, why not? You're so sympathetic. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Raina laughed and continued, Yes, things very nearly went wrong. But that's what I really pride myself on, turning a failure into a success. A triumphant expression appeared on his face. To devise a hiding place on the spur of the moment was really rather creditable. Would you like me to tell you where the formula is now? His drowsiness now accentuated. Poirot seemed to find difficulty in speaking clearly. I do not understand you, he whispered. Made one little mistake, Monsieur Poirot, Brenna told him with a sneer. You underestimated my intelligence. I wasn't really taken in just now by your ingenious red herring about poor old Corelli. A man with your brains couldn't seriously have believed that Corelli would be thinking about. You see, I'm playing for big stakes. That piece of paper delivered in the right quarters means £50,000 to me. He leaned back. Just think what a man of my ability can do with £50,000. In a voice of increasing drowsiness, Poirot managed to reply, I do not like to think of it. Well, perhaps not. I appreciate that, Raina conceded. One has to allow for a different point of view. Poirot leaned forward and appeared to be making an effort to pull himself together. And it will not be so, he exclaimed. I will denounce you. Hercule Poirot. Oh. He broke off suddenly. Hercule Poirot will do nothing, declared Raina, as the detective sank back in his seat. With a laugh which was close to a sneer, the secretary continued, You've never guessed, did you? Even when you said that the whiskey was bitter. You see, my dear Monsieur Poirot, I took not just one, but several tubes of hyacinth from that box. If anything, you've had slightly more than I gave Sir Claud. Mon Dieu! Poirot gasped, struggling to rise. In a weak voice he tried to call, Hastes. His voice faded away and he sank back into his chair. His eyelids closed. Raina got to his feet, pushed his chair aside, and moved to stand over Poirot. Try to keep awake, Monsieur Poirot, he said. Surely you'd like to see where the formula was hidden, wouldn't you? He waited for a moment, but Poirot's eyes remained closed. A swift, dreamless sleep and no awakening, as our dear friend Corelli puts it, Raina commented dryly as he went to the mantelpiece, took the spills, folded them, and put them in his pocket. He moved towards the French windows, pausing only to call over his shoulder, Goodbye, my dear Monsieur Poirot. He was about to step out into the garden when he was halted by the sound of Poirot's voice speaking cheerfully and naturally. But would you not like the envelope as well? Raina spun around, and at the same moment Inspector Japp entered the library from the garden. Moving back a few steps, Raina paused irresolutely and then decided to bolt. He rushed to the French windows, only to be seized by Japp and by Constable Johnson, who also suddenly appeared from the garden. Poirot rose from his chair, stretching himself. Well, my dear chap, he asked, did you get it all? Dragging Raina back to the slide, every word thanks to your note, Poirot. You can hear everything perfectly from the terrace there just outside the window. Now, let's go over them and see what we can find. He pulled the spills from Raina's pocket and threw them onto the coffee table. He next pulled out a small tube. Hyacinth. Empty. Hastings, Poirot greeted his friend as he entered from the hall, carrying a glass of whiskey and soda which he handed to the detective. You see, Poirot addressed Raina in his kindliest manner. I refuse to play in your comedy. Instead, I made you play in mine. In my note, I gave instructions to Japp and also to Hastings. Then I make things easy for you, by complaining of the heat. I know you will suggest a drink. It is after all the opening that you need. After that it is all so straightforward. When I go to the raw, the good Hastings he is ready outside with another whiskey and soda. I change glasses, and I am back again, and so on with the comedy. Poirot gave the glass back to Hastings. And myself. I think I play my part rather well, he declared. There was a pause while Poirot and Rayner surveyed each other. Then Rayner spoke. I've been afraid of you ever since you came into this house. My scheme could have worked. I could have set myself up for life with the £50,000, perhaps even more, that I would have gone to that wretched formula. But from the moment you arrived, I stopped feeling absolutely confident that I'd get away with killing that pompous old fool and stealing his precious scrap of paper. I have observed already that you are intelligent, Poirot replied. He sat again in the armchair, looking distinctly pleased with himself, as Jack began to speak rapidly. Edward Rayner, I arrest you for the wilful murder of Sir Claud Amory, and I warn you that anything you say may be used in evidence. Jack made a gesture to the constable to take Rayner away. As Rayner made his exit in the custody of Constable Johnson, the two men passed Miss Amory, who was entering the library at the same moment. She looked back at them anxiously and then hastened to Poirot. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, as Poirot rose to greet her. "Is this true? Was it Mr. Rayner who murdered my poor brother?" "I am afraid so, mademoiselle," said Poirot. Miss Amory looked dumbfounded. Oh, she exclaimed. "I can't believe it. What wickedness! We've always treated him like one of the family, under beeswax and everything." She turned abruptly and was about to leave when Richard entered and held the door open for her. As she almost ran from the room, her niece Barbara entered from the garden. "This is simply too shattering for words," Barbara exclaimed. "Edward Rayner, of all people, who would have believed it? Somebody's been frightfully clever to have found out. I wonder who." She looked meaningfully at Poirot, who, however, gave a bow in the direction of the police inspector as he murmured, "It was Inspector Stapp who solved the case, mademoiselle." Japp beamed. "I will say for you, Monsieur Poirot, you're the goods, and a gentleman as well." With a nod to the assembled company, Japp made a brisk exit, snatching the whiskey glass from a bemused Hastings as he did so with the words, "I'll take charge of the evidence if you please, Captain Hastings." "Yes, but was it really Inspector Japp who found out who killed Uncle Claude? Or," Barbara asked Poirot coyly as she approached him, "was it you, Monsieur Hercule Poirot?" Poirot moved to Hastings, putting an arm around his old friend. "Mademoiselle," he informed Barbara, "the real credit belongs to Hastings here. He made a remark of surpassing brilliance, which puts me on the right track. Take him into the garden, and make him tell you about it." He pushed Hastings towards Barbara and shepherded them both towards the French windows. "Ah, my pet!" Barbara sighed comically to Hastings as they went out into the garden. Richard Amory was about to address Poirot when the door to the hall opened and Lucia entered. Giving a start when she saw her husband, Lucia murmured uncertainly, "Richard." Richard turned to look at her. "Lucia." Lucia moved a few steps into the room. She began and then broke off. Richard approached her and then stopped. "You—" They both looked extremely nervous and ill at ease with each other. Then Lucia suddenly caught sight of Poirot and went to him with outstretched hands. "Monsieur Poirot, how can we ever thank you?" Poirot took both her hands in his. "So, madame, your troubles are over," he announced. "A murderer has been caught. But my troubles Are they really over? Lucia asked wistfully. It is true that you do not look quite happy yet, my child. Poirot observed. Shall I ever be happy again, I wonder? I think so, well, said Poirot with a twinkle in his eye. Trust in your old Poirot. Guiding Lucia to the chair by the table in the center of the room, he picked up the spills from the coffee table, went across to Richard and handed them to him. Monsieur, he declared, I have pleasure in restoring to you Sir Claud's formula. It can be pieced together. What is the expression you use? It will be as good as new. Oh my God, the formula, Richard explained. I'd almost forgotten it. I can hardly bear to look at it again. Think what it's done to us all. It cost my father his life, and it's all but ruined the lives of all of us as well. What are you going to do with it, Richard? Richard asked him. I don't know. What would you do with it? Rising and moving to him, Lucia whispered. Would you let me? But Charles, her husband told her, handing her the spills. Do as you like with the wretched thing. Thank you, Richard, murmured Lucia. She went to the fireplace, took a match from the box on the mantelpiece, and set fire to the spills, dropping the pieces one by one into the fireplace. There is so much suffering already in the world. I cannot bear to think of any more. Madame, said Poirot, I admire the manner in which you burn many thousands of pounds with as little emotion as though they were just a few pence. They are nothing but ashes. Lucia sighed. Like my life. Poirot gave a snort. Oh, Lilar. Let us all order our coffees, he remarked in a tone of mock gloom. No, me, I like to be happy, to rejoice, to dance, to sing. See you, my children, he continued, turning to address Richard as well. I am about to take a liberty with you both. Madame looks down her nose and thinks, I have deceived my husband. Monsieur looks down his nose and thinks, I have suspected my wife. And yet what you really want, both of you, is to be in each other's arms, is it not? Lucia took a step towards her husband. Richard, she began in a low voice. Madame, Poirot interrupted her. I feel that Sir Claud may have suspected you of planning to steal his formula because, a few weeks ago, someone, no doubt an ex-colleague of Carelli, though people of that kind are continually falling out with one another, someone, I say, sent Sir Claud an anonymous letter about your mother. But do you know, my foolish child, that your husband tried to accuse himself to Inspector Japp, that he actually confessed to the murder of Sir Claud in order to save you? Lucia gave a little cry and looked adoringly at Richard. And you, monsieur, Poirot continued, figure to yourself that not more than half an hour ago your wife was shouting in my ear that she had killed your father, or because she feared that you might have done so. Lucia, Richard murmured tenderly, going to her. Being English, Poirot remarked as he moved away from them, you will not embrace in my presence, I suppose. Lucia went to him and took his hand. Monsieur Poirot, I do not think I shall ever forget you. Ever. Neither shall I forget you, madame, Poirot declared gallantly as he kissed her hand. Poirot, Richard Amory declared, I don't know what to say, except that you've saved my life and my marriage. I can't express what I feel. Do not derange yourself, my friend, replied Poirot. I am happy to have been of service to you. Lucia and Richard went out into the garden together, looking into each other's eyes. his arm around her shoulders. Following them to the window, Poirot called after them, "Bless you, mes enfants. Oh, and if you encounter Miss Barbara in the garden, please ask her to return Captain Hastings to me. We must shortly begin our journey to London." Turning back into the room, his glance fell on the fireplace. "Ah," he exclaimed as he went to the mantelpiece over the fireplace and straightened the spill vase. "Voila. Now, order and neatness are restored." With that, Poirot walked towards the door with an air of immense satisfaction.